Definitely not my particular insights. Noted anthropologists in the 1930s were already noting sort of schizotypalism among shamans, and that was decades before the word even existed in psychiatric literature. And the notion that religious ritualism has a lot to do with obsessive compulsive disorder, Freud was talking about that a century ago, and theologians were talking about that centuries before, along the lines of watch out for people who are doing this praying stuff just out of reflex and without thinking and feeling the content, try to direct them from the pure ritualism. And theologians in all the major religions have noted that. Muhammad and Christian leaders as well, and all of those, this is nothing new, and this is certainly not sort of scientific parochialism to decide there's a connection.
And could you elaborate on your theory on Paul and how he was
Oh, again, this wasn't my theory. This was some neurologist out there who published sort of this forensic neurology paper, and it was 3-4 pages long, looking at temporal lobe personality and sort of the features that go with that temporal lobe epilepsy, and just sort of obviously speculating that St. Paul fit some of this. And as far as I can tell, that paper has disappeared and had no impact at all, but it was kind of irresistible.
And you mentioned that Paul had overcome compulsive writing, or
well, let's see. He apparently had seizures, or certainly seizure-like auras, and that gets us onto thin ice in terms of how one interprets that. Is that a bunch of neurons having hiccups, or is that religious experience? But he definitely had auras, which in a contemporary person would make a neurologist begin to think epilepsy. No evidence that he was the most humorous guy on earth. Certainly hypergraphic, writing compulsively, and certainly the guy kind of thought about religious philosophical subjects, so fits the profile. But again, that's worth a 3-page amusing paper in a neurology journal, and not much more than that.
You just choose to talk about it in class?
Because once again, irresistible.
And I guess, what experiences with students regarding this subject have particularly stuck out to you?
Well, not surprisingly, the folks at the two extremes, instead of the ones asking, is it going to be on the final? It's, in some cases, people are very bothered or challenged by the content of it, and that's not meant to be self-congratulatory, but it's kind of hard to think about this stuff if you have any strong feelings about religion one way or the other. And I sure recall the period of my life when sort of I was losing all capacity for religion and spirituality, and in retrospect, that's one of the most formative transitions in my life, and that had a hell of a lot to do with sort of making who I am. And you get somebody at not all that different of an age, and they're suddenly having their own belief system questioned, and in the context of them having bought into an explanatory structure of science, if they're sitting there in the class, and that's a pretty heavy-duty thing to watch happening. Likewise, the people who are extremely upset because it doesn't challenge their considerable sense of religiosity, but nonetheless is upsetting to them, that's kind of moving also to see.
And do you have colleagues in the sciences that consider themselves spiritual?
Absolutely.
And is this a topic that comes up in conversation often?
Absolutely not. And I could not tell you a single one, other than people who've worked in my lab, I could not tell you a single one other than the few who have made that a centerpiece, sort of a public feature of what they do. For example, there's this guy, Francis Collins, who's amazing. He isolated the first gene for a human disease in the late 80s, the cystic fibrosis gene mutation. He was the director of the Human Genome Project. He is as credible credible. He's like one of the best molecular biologists on earth, and he's an evangelical Christian. And he, in fact, just published a book a couple of months ago trying to explain how he reconciles the two. He can get away with it. Very few scientists can. As far as I can tell, very few of them have the remotest interest in doing it.
Is this a topic that intrigues you in particular, or you choose not to think about most of the time?
No, actually, there's probably not a week that goes by where I don't very strongly wish that I were capable of religiosity or spirituality, and sort of a vague nostalgia for back then, or a vague envy of people who are capable of it. So it is a very real, ongoing thing. As far as I can tell, people who are just resolutely atheist get through it by two routes. One is it's utterly irrelevant to think otherwise. That was sort of always obvious to them, and it seems as absurd to believe in any of that as to believe in, like, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And the others are ones who came from some sort of religious background, and where it's been this huge oscillating thing to eventually get to this point that the other folks have been at throughout, on much more of this model. So yes, it definitely interests me.
So would you consider yourself an agnostic then, or definitely atheist?
Utterly atheist.
But interestingly enough, you think about this all the time.
Tons, yeah. And sufficiently so. There's this society called the Freedom from Religion Foundation that actually gave me a prize a few years back because of my openly writing about being atheist. And I don't display the thing they gave me, but I have it at home, and they call it the Emperor Has No Clothes Award. And it's this little statuette of this naked emperor, except for the well-placed fig leaf. And it's something I'm pretty active about. But yeah, it's not by chance. It's a very ongoing issue that I think about, feel about.
Well, why do you think you have that sort of nostalgia, or maybe even in some cases envy, for people who do have this?
It makes your life a whole lot easier. You sit there and you look at cancer or Alzheimer's disease or ethnic cleansing or global warming or whatever, and if you have an attributional system, and especially one that implies some sort of benevolence behind it, and especially one that also implies some capacity to influence the system, and especially one that implies that not only can you influence the benevolence, but you can do it better than other people can, or people who look or speak or pray like you can do it better than other people can. That solves a hell of a lot of the most emotionally wrenching things around you in life. I mean, it's not for nothing that religiosity is associated with better health. And it's not for nothing that atheists have astronomically higher rates of clinical depression than religious people do. So, great, where can I sign up if you can sign up?